Welcome to this video, and we're going to take a look at one of the exemplars from 2019, more specifically the grade 11s. We're going to focus on the functions questions, and that would be questions 5 and 6. And it comes from the province of the Eastern Cape, and as you can see there, the National Senior Certificate, grade 11. So in question 5, they start off by giving you the equation for f of x as negative 3 over x plus 3 minus 1, which is the equation of the hyperbola, and g of x equals negative a to the power of x, which is the equation of an exponential graph. They also tell you that the point 1 and negative 3 lies on g. Question 5.1 says determine the value of a. Now, whenever you are given a point on the graph, in this case, the 1 and the negative 3, so I was going to show you over here. Start by substituting it into g of x, so we replace the x with a 1 and the y with a negative 3. So as you can see, 1 mark is allocated for the substitution, and then solving for a will give you the other mark, so a total of 2 marks. In question 2, it says write down the equations of the asymptotes of f being my equation of my hyperbola. To find my vertical asymptote, I will take my denominator, set it equal to 0, and then solve for x. And then my horizontal asymptote will be here at the back, so that's where they get the y equals negative 1. As you can see, 1 mark is allocated for x is negative 3, and 1 mark is allocated for y equals negative 1, making it a total of 2 marks. In question 5.3, it says write down the range of g being the exponential graph. And as you can see over here, the negative in front of the a said that we are drawing below the horizontal asymptote, which is the x-axis, and therefore it is y is less than 0. Y is an element of the real numbers. You can also write it as y is an element of negative infinity up until 0. And as you can see, it was only worth 1 mark. Question 5.4, determine the x and the y intercept. To determine an x-intercept, we set our y value equal to 0, which is then also worth 1 mark. And then we solve for x. To get my y-intercept, I make my x value equal to 0, and I then solve for y. As you can see, that is also worth 1 mark. So 1 mark for substituting y with 0, 1 mark for getting x as 6, and 1 mark for getting y equals negative 2. In question 5.5, it says draw neat sketches of f and g on the same set of axes, clearly indicating all asymptotes and intercepts with the axes. So if we concentrate on graph f, you will see that you get for your x and your y-intercept 1 mark. So there is my x-intercept and my y-intercept. My asymptotes, remember your dotted lines over here and over there. Always a good idea to maybe write there y equals negative 1 and x equals negative 3. And then obviously for the shape. So as you can see, a total of 3 marks for graph F. Then for graph G, the y-intercept. So there's my y-intercept, your asymptote, which is your x-axis. So maybe just write there y equals 0, and then the shape of the graph. So also 3 marks in total, then 6 marks for this question. Determine the axis of symmetry of F, which has a positive gradient. So we know that the equation is y equals x plus k. You can then substitute your x and your y value from your asymptotes, solving for k, which then brings it to y equals x plus 2. Shortcut is you can always hold that negative 3 closed and write down what you've got, which is x plus 3 minus 1, which is x plus 2. And then question 5.7, given that h of x is f of x plus b, determine the value of b such that the range is y may not equal 0. Remember, in this case, we said y can be anything, but it may not equal negative 1. So all I'm going to do is bring it back up 1 unit. So therefore, b equals 1. And you can see it's worth 2 marks. That then brings us to question 6. They tell us that R is the turning point of the graph, and you are given a parabola there. P and Q are the x-intercepts of F. TV is a straight line parallel to the y-axis. Very important. You can also indicate it if you want to. And then it says the graph of G is a straight line. I always like to write y equals x plus 4. Has an x-intercept at P. S is a point of intersection of F and G. Question 6.1, determine the coordinates of P. Now they tell you over there that P is the x-intercept. So what you can do is you can take your g of x and let your y value equal 0. So therefore solve for x. X is negative 4, and remember your y value was 0, so write it as negative 4 and 0. As you can see, 1 mark for substitution and 1 mark for your answer. Now for 6.2 it says hence or otherwise write down the coordinate of Q. Now hence means use the answer that you just got in the previous question. So because this is a parabola, we can use symmetry. Now I know that is negative 1. I've just worked out my P value. So using symmetry, I can immediately say that Q is 2, 0. And the reason I can do that is I say it's 3 units, as 3 units to the left would have been negative 4 and 0. So 3 units to the right will therefore be 2 and 0. So as you can see, 2 marks for your answer. Question 6.3, calculate the average gradient between P and R. That is just your normal gradient. We already know that P is negative 4 and 0. We know the coordinates of R. You can use your gradient formula, as you can see over here. Difference in y values over difference in x values. 1 mark for substitution and 1 mark for your final answer. Please be so careful with question 6.4. It says, show that for F, A is negative 1, B is negative 2, and C is 8. In other words, you actually have to calculate those values. You may not use them to prove that it is actually true. So as you can see, there are 2 different options over here. The first option is we use our normal formula that says y equals a, x minus x1, x minus x2, where x1 and x2 will be my x-intercepts. As you can see, that is worth 1 mark. So we know that is minus 4, we know that is positive 2, and that is what we substitute in. Then our other point that we substitute in will be negative 1 and 9. That's where your other point is indicated. And then you just solve for a. Then you substitute it back into the equation, and then once you've multiplied it out, you will have it in standard form, and you read off your B and your C value. That is option number 1. Option number 2 would be if you use the turning point formula, as you can see over there, and you substitute your turning point values P and Q. After that, you will substitute negative 4 and 0 in, or 2 and 0, one of your x-intercepts, and solve for A. Then substitute it back into the formula, multiply it out, and also end up with your equation in standard form. Then you read off your B and your C value. It's really up to you, and you decide which one is easier for you to use. Question 6.5, calculate the coordinates of S, the point of intersection. That means where the 2 graphs cut. So what you do is you set them equal, and as you see, there's 1 mark allocated for that. Then get everything on one side, in other words, get it in standard form, and then you can actually factorize, so you get a mark for the factors. And then obviously you choose the one that makes sense, and as you can see, S is on the positive x-axis, so therefore you choose your positive answer. Substitute it back into either the left-hand side, which is x plus 4, or the right-hand side, which is negative x squared minus 2x plus 8. They will yield the same answer. You get your y equals 5. And always a good idea, it says the coordinates of S. So in other words, an x and a y value. Now for the next question, it says determine the maximum length of TV between the points P and S. So now what we can do is we can look at the difference in the y values. So we will go top graph minus bottom graph, and that is worth 1 mark over here. Then what you can do is you can actually complete the square over here. Now the reason we complete the square is so that we can find it in turning point format and read off the y value over here. Now this will give you a sad face parabola in itself, and we know that that has a local maximum. So if I can find out the y value of this new turning point or this new equation, then I can find the actual maximum. What you can do also is find top graph minus bottom graph like they've done over here. Then you can have a new equation, which you will find there. You can find the turning point. So you can use x equals negative b over 2a to find your x value, which is negative 3 over 2, and then substitute it back into this formula to get your corresponding y value, which is then also 25 over 4, which is 6,25 units. And once again, it's up to you, whichever one you find the easiest. But 6.7 is slightly more difficult, and it says determine the values of x for which x times f of x will be less than 0. Now if we analyze it, it will be two things that we have to multiply. So it's either where your x's will be positive and your graph will be below the x-axis, because a positive times a negative is a negative, or where your x's will be negative and your graph will be above the x-axis. So let's have a look at the first one. So over here, all my x's will be positive. So I'm going to look at the first scenario over here. So this one, while my graph is below the x-axis, and that will be over here. Now I know that that q value over there was 2. So as you can see, that will be where x is greater than 2. So I'm just going to write it here. So I know that is x is greater than 2. Or I've got another scenario where my x's will be negative, which is on this side, but my graph must be above the x-axis, and that will be over here. And that will be between, as you can see, negative 4 and 0. So I can say or x lies between minus 4 and 0. Now some of you don't like that notation, so if I want to write this one first because it comes first on the number line, I can say x is an element of negative 4 up until 0, or from 2 to infinity. If you use the notation on top, just remember over there to just say x is an element of the real numbers. So that then brings us to the end of this video. Please feel free to subscribe to our channel and also go and have a look at some of our other videos that are posted. You're also welcome to make some recommendations or ask if you want us to make some videos on other sections that you might be battling with. Thank you.